Hello, my name's Ben.
And my name's Josh.
Welcome back to FPL Graduates. Welcome back to another video where we're heading into Game Week 25, another double game week. We've had some craziness over the last week or so with FA Cup and Carabao Cup fixtures, resulting in the announcement of double game weeks, etc. Let's get into the transfer targets and who we think you should be targeting going into Game Week 25.
Okay then, so yeah, as Ben mentions, we're probably going to be targeting mainly some of the double game weekers in game week 25. I think, yeah, like we said, the doubles, the FA Cup games especially, have sort of thrown up a lot of curveballs, you could say. Obviously, no one really expected Liverpool to be knocked out, resulting in them and Spurs playing in game week 34, as well as Chelsea and Everton also having a confirmed fixture in game week 34. So yeah, it's sort of throws up a couple of problems for people who maybe looking to free hit in game week 34, because that blank game week, which was going to be really large, could now be significantly less. And then also for game week 29 free hitters, obviously it's going to be a lot better to free hit there, and it gives you the opportunity to free hit there rather than later in the season. So thinking about that, we're looking at Ezri Konsa to start things off in this video. Obviously Aston Villa do double in 25 but will blank in game week 29 due to them being the opponents of Liverpool for that fixture when they have the EFL Cup final. Ezri Konsa obviously went off today with a hamstring injury, recording this on Sunday night. Unknown in terms of severity, but obviously when anyone pulls up with a hamstring injury, it doesn't seem like it's going to be very sort of a quick turnaround. One thing to note as well is that Aston Villa have, I think, only Axel Disasi, should I say, as like a centre-back coming into the team. Tyrone Mings and Pau Torres are still out injured. So this is another injury to add to the list for Aston Villa, who have only kept 2 clean sheets with Konsa in the squad. It's one of those defences that have really good data, but can never back it up with a clean sheet, which I've sort of said since game week 1, I think, this season, with this Aston Villa defence. What's your thoughts on Aston Villa defensive assets, Ben? Because obviously we've got Konsa on screen here, but I'm sure some might be looking at Lucas Digne as well.
Yeah, I think you can put sort of a lot of the Aston Villa assets sort of in the same, because there hasn't been too much attacking output and attacking threat from the defenders so far this season from Aston Villa, whereas in previous seasons we've seen significant sort of attacking numbers, and that's just sort of as a result of the good defensive data, meaning that the attacking data isn't as good. But of course we haven't seen as many clean sheets. I think if you're looking at cut price in terms of option, Tazassi is probably the option to go for, just because he's not using up much budget. He's like, what, 4.2? So yeah, like a decent enough price, but I wouldn't be looking at investing too much into that Aston Villa defensive assets anyway. Yeah, not the biggest fan, but you never know. They could get a clean sheet against Ipswich, and then anything else in the Liverpool game is just a bonus on top. Okay, so Dean Huijsen is the next defender on our list. Not too many defenders, because we're looking at really attacking going into the double games, etc. Bournemouth generally have some decent fixtures coming up. They're looking in great form as well. And Huijsen has risen in price to 4.4 million. Of course, with the 5 clean sheets, a couple of attacking returns, the attacking data doesn't actually look too bad at all from him. He's looking very good as an FPL asset, and week by week, I think the appeal for him and for Bournemouth defenders is going to get stronger. Southampton away, Wolves at home over the next 2 is not bad at all. I wouldn't expect clean sheets every week from Bournemouth, but I would say that when they play well, they do tactically outclass a lot of teams, and as a result, clean sheets usually sort of end up being locked in when they play that well. So yeah, in my opinion, I think a decent option. Of course, with double game weeks, etc., is going to be swayed a little bit. But if you're looking at a bit of a longer term fix, then I think he could be a good option.
Yeah, definitely agree. This is specifically for those guys who are maybe looking to free hit in not free hit in 29, should I say, as he does have a fixture then. Also, Bournemouth's fixture run, as you was alluding to, Ben, it's really long term. So say if you've used your wild card, used your free hit already, this is a guy that you could probably have on your team until the end of the season, and have him rotating in and out of your squad. I think the attacking threat is actually really good considering the amount of minutes he's played. He's a big threat from set pieces. We've seen that with those 2 attacking returns being goals so far. So yeah, a nice little cheap defensive option if you're needing some rotational cover. Okay, then, so moving into the midfielders, then we're going to kick off with the Bournemouth midfielders, and obviously the three of them being Antoine Semenyo, Justin Kluivert, and obviously Dango Ouattara. Three really good options in their own right. I think they all have their pros and their cons, which we'll go through now, and we'll sort of give them like a ranking of our own personal preference at the end of it. So starting off with Semenyo, obviously you know that he's going to be nailed for 90 minutes. Even played the FA Cup game against Everton where they won 2-0. Interesting to see he was on penalties as well. So probably if Kluivert's off the pitch, we could see Semenyo taking over that mantle, which is interesting. He's 5.6 million, so he's like the mid-price option out of the three. 7 goals, 4 assists so far this season. For me, I would rank him third out of the lot, just because although you are getting the minutes, the expected goal data and expected goal involvement data is just lower significantly than the other two if they're getting the same amount of minutes. And I just don't think the minutes are that sort of, you don't need to worry about the minutes about Kluivert and Ouattara at the moment, at least in the short term. If you're thinking more longer term, I think Semenyo is probably the safer pick. What's your thoughts on Semenyo, Ben?
Yeah, it depends really on what context you're looking at. If you're looking up to Gameweek 29, then I think you can sort of make a case as to why Semenyo would be third. But if you're looking for almost a season keeper, then I do think he's probably the most secure and safest pick to go for. We've seen it before, like Kluivert's XG numbers have been severely inflated by the penalty XG. If you look at open play XGI, then Semenyo sort of levels out with the other two Bournemouth midfielders. So, yeah, I think it's all about perception with that. Like the big chance involvement is all very similar for the three of them as well. So, yeah, I think for the security of minutes over the longer term, you'd probably look at him. But in terms of explosivity, you're looking at the other two assets.
Yeah, we've got Justin Kluivert on screen now. So as Ben sort of mentioned, the data is pretty similar. Obviously, Kluivert, the reason that you probably go with him is for those penalties. You know, we've seen it multiple times throughout this season. Bournemouth getting penalties 3 in one game, which then puts the ceiling of Kluivert really, really high. So it's something to take into account. Another thing as well is obviously he's playing a lot more minutes now, which is great. His data is decent. When he was playing 60, 70 minutes, probably on the same level as Semenyo. Now he's playing 90 minutes. We're seeing that, you know, still remain the same, but he's playing for longer. So, yeah, you're more likely to get returns, basically. So for me, I think he's a good asset. He is getting a bit more pricey now, though, at 5.9 million. It's just whether you've got the budget for that, which, you know, most managers should do. But for me, I think he is top just because of those penalties. But yeah, I think if it's him or Dango, I think they're both really, really good options. What's your thoughts on Kluivert, Ben?
Yeah, I think he's a decent option. Of course, the penalty factor is so huge. I think once he gets another 0.2 or 3 million more expensive, then it's a real question to ask yourself on whether it's worth that value. Because if the other two assets don't go up at the same rate that Kluivert goes up at, then you're almost sort of thinking the other two could be better value. Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult because there's so little to split between them. Like, you can make a genuine statistical case for each of the three to go into your team, which is crazy. Like, you don't really see that two option in terms of decision. Like, there's usually one clear. The clearer factor for me is obviously the penalties. Like, that's the one thing that Kluivert does have going for him over the other two. But of course, like, you could make a case for sort of any of those three, but in terms of a talisman, then you're probably looking at Kluivert.
Yeah, 100%. And then we've got Ouattara up last. He's got the most big chance involvement in the least amount of minutes, which is quite impressive to see. Obviously, he's playing that number 9 role, so you'd expect him to get more big chances and get, you know, in on the end of them playing that role. 10 goal involvement so far in those 1,200 minutes, which is interesting. I've personally got him in my team. Where would you rank yours, Ben? Sort of 1, 2, and 3 if you had to sort of pick them off the top of your head now.
Oh God, like, I think rather than rank them 1, 2, and 3, for myself, it's depending on what sort of manager you are. If you're a manager that likes penalty takers, you're going to go for Kluivert. If you're a manager that likes security of minutes, Semenyo. If you're a manager that likes playing a midfielder out of position, in the case of Ouattara, you go for him. At the moment, in my situation, I'd probably prefer Ouattara as my number 1 pick, just because the value is there in the short term. Like, he's significantly cheaper, almost $1 million cheaper than the most expensive option, and is putting up the same numbers, and is currently sort of, at least in the short term, the same security of minutes. So he'd be my number 1, closely followed by Kluivert for penalties and 3 for Semenyo. But like I said, like, it's all going to be very much dependent on the sort of manager you are and the sort of situation that you're looking for in terms of a replacement for whatever you may have in your team at the moment. Okay, so next up we have got Morgan Rogers of Aston Villa, and at the moment he seems to be hauling in on all the non-PL games at the moment, getting golden assists left, right, and centre. But it is really promising for owners in FPL teams. I think you can make a genuine case that Aston Villa scored in both these games in the double game week. The game against Ipswich is almost prime for Aston Villa, and I'd argue that Liverpool at home fixture is a really good fixture for Aston Villa as well to go out and just attack Liverpool. They've done it to so many big teams at Villa Park over the most sort of like last couple of years even. And Morgan Rogers is the number one pick to be looking at for the double game week in terms of Aston Villa assets, in my opinion. Anyway, of course, the 6 goals, 5 assists, we could see him on penalties if Ollie Watkins is indeed out. We'll just have to wait and see on that because Villa have quite a few good penalty takers as well. Josh, what's the thoughts on Morgan Rogers? There's not too much to sort of not love about him, isn't there?
Yeah, I think he's like you say, probably the best option to go for if you're looking at someone to bring in. One thing to be on the side of caution though is that he's on 8 yellow cards, so if he gets 2 more and reaches 10, he will have a 2-game ban. So if you're thinking more longer term with him, I would really take that into consideration because that could be quite annoying, especially coming up towards those blanks and doubles a little bit later on in the season. Outside of that though, he's a fantastic asset. You know, he's hauled against Spurs in the FA Cup, he's hauled against Celtic in the Champions League. We're just waiting for that to sort of transition into the Premier League in sort of the recent times, but we've seen, you know, what he can do. I think the haul against City not so long ago as well. Ipswich at home is obviously the game that you're expecting to get the most points from. If he gets anything in Liverpool, it's fantastic. I think even those fixtures afterwards as well, with Chelsea at home and Palace away, they're not easy by any means, but Chelsea concede like to pretty much anyone at the moment. They always seem to ship one, and I think Morgan Rogers has sort of made a name of scoring and assisting in those bigger games rather than the smaller games. So it could be a genuine case where we see him blank against Ipswich and then haul against Liverpool. It's the type of player he is. So yeah, if you're looking for an Aston Villa attacker to really go ahead and attack this double, I would probably still bring him in even if he has those 8 yellow cards. Okay, then, so on to another Aston Villa midfielder, and a lot of people have been talking about this guy on social media throughout the week. Understandably so, it's a big new signing for Villa. Marcus Rashford at 6.6 million. Obviously, he made his debut against Spurs off the bench. I thought he looked quite good, to be fair, a lot better than he has been for United this season. Even for United this season, he's picked up 5 attacking returns in less than 1,000 minutes, so pretty decent numbers, to be honest, 4 of those being goals as well. It's just a difficult one to sort of predict. I just don't think he will necessarily get the start straight away, especially with how well Jacob Ramsey's playing on the left. We can maybe see him play up top if Ollie Watkins still remains out, but that is still a question mark at the time of recording. What's your thoughts on him, Ben? Were you impressed by him against Spurs?
Yeah, I was definitely impressed by him against Spurs. He showed more hunger, and I think that's really important for any player, that they've got to be hungry. And you know, he maybe didn't have that or lost that a little bit in Manchester United, but understandably, there's so much media attention on him at the moment. So I do see Emery sort of integrating him into the team rather than sort of putting him straight in. Like, I don't expect him to start both in the double, but you know, he does become really enticing as an asset because we know how explosive he can be, especially on the break in the games like Liverpool at home, like Chelsea at home, where Villa will really excel. You know, on the break and in transition. So I'm very much tempted by him. If Watkins is out, then the appeal goes up even more for him because at 6.6 million, that's really good value for what you're potentially going to get from Marcus Rashford. So in my opinion, I think you make the decision on Rashford pretty late, but definitely keep him in your considerations because, you know, he could end up being a fantastic asset here at Villa. Okay, so next up is a Brentford pick, Brian Mbeumo from Brentford. Of course, the stats are looking fairly good for him. The big chance involvement decent, and probably just that step up from the Bournemouth midfielders in terms of like the output, the goals, assists, and big chance involvements, etc. But you are paying that little bit more in terms of price, 7.9 million. Very, very highly owned at the higher ranks. Sort of you're looking at 50, 60, 70% at those higher ranks, so a lot of you guys may already have him, but if you don't, I would make some serious considerations on bringing him in, because fixtures look fantastic for Brentford going forwards, and from an attacking perspective, the fixtures are there to sort of for the taking and to take advantage of. Bryan Mbeumo, I think, is a good asset. You know, he's fairly on par in terms of being sort of one of the two best assets in that Brentford team. Josh, what are your overriding thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think he's in an interesting one, because when you look at the data, it's actually not, out of this world. He's only had 8 xg with 14 goals. That's a high overperformance so far this season. But obviously a lot of penalties are taken into account with that. I think for me, if you don't own him, I'd probably look at getting him, just because the pain that he'll probably cause you over these next few weeks. He tends to not do a lot, but will return with some really crucial points for owners. 8 million is a big price tag, but I think he is worth it still, despite Yoane Wissa being a little bit cheaper than him. Obviously, one thing to note as well with Brentford players, they will play in Gameweek 29. So again, if you're not looking to free hit in 29, then obviously he has that sort of advantage to him as well. Talismanic, you pay the premium for these type of players, and he's going to play 90 minutes week in, week out. So on to the forwards then, and we're going to talk about Yoane Wissa, as I mentioned, on Mbeumo, a little bit cheaper at 6.3 million. So if you wanted to go against the grain of Mbeumo, I think this is a nice way to do it and still cover off that Brentford attack for these fixtures. He's had 13 goal involvement so far this season, which sort of replicates his data, which I'm much more of a fan of. I'd much rather go for those guys who are sort of hitting their data mark. There are a few exceptions to that, like we saw with like Heung-min Son over the years. I think Mbeumo could be a similar sort of player to that, but I want a little bit more consistency from him until he does that. Obviously, the main negative with Wissa, he's not got the penalties. He's also going to be scoring 1 less point per goal, and obviously not getting any clean sheet points as well. So it's something to take into account. He's going to have to do more than Mbeumo to outscore him. So if you think he's going to match Mbeumo, I think that's going to be quite difficult, to be honest, unless he's sort of scoring all the goals. What's your thoughts on him, Ben?
Yeah, I think Vissa's stats suggest that he is actually the better asset in terms of what you can expect from him in terms of output from an attacking perspective. Of course, takes up one of your striker spots, and I keep going back to that. They seem to be so valuable this season, the free striker slots. But yeah, the fixtures lend itself to sort of being really good for Brentford, and this is going to be the differential that separates you from those who go with Mbeumo and those who sort of go Mbeumo and Wissa. I think you can have that conversation. I think to make any gains, you're going to have both. You can't go sort of one or the other. You go all in, or you sort of just avoid. So yeah, the fixtures lend itself well enough to be like, yeah, you've got to go for it. But it's a case, again, team structure, whether you are or aren't free hitting, it's going to all sort of come into that equation. But for me, a fantastic asset. Okay, so finally, we've got Ollie Watkins. Of course, missed the FA Cup game. We believe he's relatively close to coming back in, but we don't have a time frame on whether he's going to be available for Gameweek 25 at the time of recording anyway. So we're just going to have to wait and see on that. With a couple of home fixtures coming up, I think if he is fit, he's going to be fantastic. In terms of data, he's performing to the level that we expect him. Involved in pretty much everything Aston Villa do going forwards in terms of the big chance involvement, etc. Josh, definitely a viable option. Of course, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get to at 8.9 million with a lot of squad structures investing heavily on those Liverpool assets. But do you think it is worth bringing in Ollie Watkins, even if you have to move a couple of parts in your team?
I'm going to be honest, I don't think it will be, just because of the injury that he's got at the moment. With the depth that Villa have in those attacking areas right now, I could easily see him being pulled off a little bit earlier, like we saw when John Duran was there. So for me, I'd be a bit reluctant, especially when most people will be making like an Isak to Watkins kind of move. For me personally, I've got a lot of value tied up in Isak, which is also something you should consider if you're thinking about moving on assets like that. It's going to cost you a lot more money to try and get that sort of player back. Again, if you want to go against the grain, I think it's a nice differential. It's a nice double game week. Again, like we said, I think Villa could cause that Liverpool defence some problems. And I do expect him to probably be back for that game. Obviously, like we said, no real sort of return estimate at the moment, but it sounded like he'd be back for the Premier League fixture at the weekend. Obviously on the penalties as well, which is something you've got to bear in mind. If he is on the pitch, obviously he's not a prolific penalty taker, I'd say. So when he gets one, I'd sort of close my eyes a little bit if I was watching it. But it is a slight positive at the moment. You've got to take it on the chin. But yeah, for me, I'd probably just sort of keep Isak or looked at other Aston Villa assets personally. Okay then, so that wraps up our double game week 25 transfer targets. Real sort of focus on those sort of Villa assets in particular, obviously doubling this week. If you wanted to know what sort of the best Liverpool assets are, it's going to be Trent, if he's fit, Salah and Gakpo for those three guys. Obviously myself, I'm on Arnie's slot personally, and I know Ben, you've got those three guys already. I just probably wouldn't go outside of that if you'd agree on that.
Yeah, I think outside of that, it's probably not worth. Like, if Trent does have an injury that looks to be sort of sustained over this next double game week, then, you know, of course, make some considerations to bring someone else in. But yeah, that pretty much covers all the points in terms of those Liverpool assets. But yeah, as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the FPL graduates. And I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
See you guys
next time. Have a good game week, everyone.
Oh, you may rise, but you'll never make me wanna stick